A few scriptures from the Gospels today. The first is Matthew 5:4. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Mark 11:15 through 17. Jesus and his followers came to Jerusalem, and Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching, and he was saying, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations. But you've made it a den of thieves." And finally, when Jesus was on the cross in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verses 33 and 34, when they came to the place that is called the skull, or Golgotha, they crucified Jesus there with two criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And then Jesus said, "God, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Well, I got a kick out of Jeff's opening announcement, the slight little threat that if you want coffee, you better help out, You know where to hit us all, our addiction to our coffee, I have a feeling there'll be some new volunteers. It reminded me of a Catholic priest up north where I was a pastor when I first graduated from seminary from 1983, beginning of 84 rather, through the end of 87. And there was a little town up there, a UCC church, a Missouri Synod Lutheran church, and a Catholic church. The Catholic church, the priest and I were friends. And he would pack them in on Saturday nights. Not big on Sunday mornings, but during the summer, pack them in on Saturday nights. And I said, how do you do this? He said, what are you doing there? And he said, "Oh, it's easy. We have this thing called mortal sin. If you don't come to worship, it's a mortal sin." He said, "It's great for attendance, Well, we don't have that. I'm depending on you actually wanting to be here. And I'm glad you are. The text this morning offers us three different shades or moods, in a sense, of love. The love that Jesus embodied so beautifully in his very human life. And my message this morning is just a brief reminder of these three, and I'll spend more time with one than the other two. But the three are: blessed are those who mourn, the importance of grieving when you need to, of feeling sadness when you need to, and the promise is you'll find strength, comfort with strength. The second is that Jesus is calling us to love everyone with that radical, absurd, incredibly inclusive, wild love that would lead him on the cross to say, "God, forgive the people who are killing me. They don't really know what they're doing." I'll come back to that one. And then the third was the story of the temple and the cleansing in Jerusalem, and that's going to be the focus. But first, blessed are those who mourn. I'm not going to say too much about this one, except that I think it's important to just pause and acknowledge the deep places that the Supreme Court ruling this last week has touched within so many of us. The issue of abortion hits close to home for a lot of us, for almost all of us, and for some of us in extremely tender and vulnerable parts of our human experience. So we need to acknowledge this and just take off our shoes metaphorically and understand that this territory is holy ground when we get into these places in people's lives. And the right for a woman to be free and able to safely and privately make her own choices regarding her own body and the most intimate, personal, and often painful decisions a person will ever make was just messed with, to put it mildly. Disrespected in a way that I know has been triggering and traumatic for a lot of people. So we take a moment to say to each other, we see each other, we meet each other there, and we will support each other, whatever that means. As I've reflected these past couple of days, sadness has certainly been a part of my own journey. I'm saddened that the hard work of so many to secure basic reproductive rights and privacy has been undermined and rolled back. And I'm saddened by the implications of this ruling, as I said before, for other communities and their rights. It's saddening and it's scary. And in addition to the sadness, I'm also angry. I am. The sadness turns to anger when I consider the role that certain kinds of churches have played in this whole unfolding for decades now. The so-called Christian right, and by the way, I'm not going to be partisanly political in my message today, so you can, exhale if you need to. For some of you, I'll be tipping up to the edge of it, but I'm going to be careful. But I'm angry at the role that the Christian right has played. I am going to honor, first of all, not necessarily agree, but honor the Christians I know who genuinely and sincerely and lovingly feel that their faith compels them to oppose abortion and who are driven by a very sincere commitment. I'm going to honor that. And God knows we need to be able to have that conversation more mutually respectfully among Christians who are motivated by their faith and find themselves on different sides of this issue. We have got to learn how to love each other better and hear each other and figure out ways to approach this issue, new ways. But the anger comes from the undeniable fact that there has been a lot of dishonesty, hypocrisy, manipulation, meanness, disrespect, coercion, and anything but Christ-centered maneuvering in the name of God in the evangelical wing of the political conservatism when it comes to the so-called pro-life movement, and I'm saddened by the lack of integrity in that kind of Christianity and that kind of political gamesmanship. It bothers me as one who loves Jesus and the scriptures to see that happen in the name of God. I'm not buying it. The simple truth is that the religious right made the difference in the Bush-Gore presidential race and in the Trump-Clinton presidential race, both of which led to Supreme Court appointments of the justices that gave us this decision this past week. Progressive friends of mine, most of whom are not church people, because they're so turned off by this kind of junk. But they have said to me when they hear me talking about Jesus in a much different way, they say, you Christians like you who have a different take on God and Jesus and the Bible and justice and respect for women and the earth and what that means for all the world, you need to find your voice and speak up more and get more organized, will you please? I think they're right. So the cleansing of the temple. I think it's an important text for us to remember in light of this past week and this Supreme Court ruling in particular. Jesus experienced and expressed some outrage at what was happening in the halls of power and in the name of God. And he shows us that there is a time to channel our passion for what is right and our outrage at what is wrong and take direct action that is confrontational, public, a challenge to established authority, messy, not always nice, but also deliberate, strategic, organized, planned, and provocative. Jesus didn't just have a hissy fit in the temple that day. It was planned. What's that mean for us? I don't know specifically. But all I'm saying right now is that Scripture teaches us that there is a time to say enough is enough. and to not always be calm and nice about how we say what must be said. So if you're feeling outraged this morning by the events of this past week, then please know you're not being unchristian. And as the kids and I talked about, it's okay to be angry. Sometimes it's the only healthy response to certain things. And it all comes down to what we do with that. I don't think anger is ever a sustainable primary fuel for a person's approach to life or even to doing justice. It can be a well-needed shot in the arm or kick in the pants now and then. But as a primary fuel, it gets funky quickly. It festers into something that won't be life-giving. And so what is the primary fuel that, well, you know, love. And for us as followers of Jesus, the love that we see embodied in that life, who did not equivocate, but who never disrespected. Somebody sent me a text this last week or after this came out and said, you know, I know what you're going to say. And I don't feel like loving people on the other side of this right now. I'm sick of it. What do I do? Well, exactly what she did. Be honest. Feel what you feel. Give it to God. Say, if love is still the answer here, you're going to have to show me a new way of understanding what love means, and God will. To me, Jesus' words, God forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, are some of the most challenging words in the Bible, because on at least some very real level, people know often exactly what they're doing. And that's what gets me angry. You know, as Ella said, if somebody deliberately hurts somebody else, that makes me angry, and I want to somehow stop them and get in the way. Well, I was thinking about all this in preparation for this morning's message, and I found myself going back to a sermon I heard the journalist Reverend Bill Moyers give. The occasion was the 50th anniversary of the United Church of Christ in the year 2007. Our denomination has historic roots that go way back, but as a denomination, the UCC came into being in 1957. And Bill Moyers came and gave the opening address, the sermon, at that gathering celebration in Hartford, Connecticut, and I was there. Many people don't realize that Bill Moyers, by the way, if you don't know who Bill Moyers was, a journalist, a very prominent figure on public television, just a brilliant figure, 88 years old now. He's an ordained minister, grew up in the Baptist church, became very involved in the United Church of Christ later on in his journey. And he was a member of Riverside Church in New York City, one of the more prominent UCC Presbyterian churches in the country. And so, his address and some things that I remembered him saying came to mind in light of everything I'm talking about today. And so I figured, I wonder if it's available somehow. And sure enough, by the miracles of the internet, I found that address. It went for over an hour. Don't worry, I'm not going to give it to you, all of it to you. But I listened a couple times and distilled a few excerpts that I wanted to share with you. So here's how he began. He said, on this Saturday morning, June 3rd, 2007, in the opening ceremony of this church's 50th anniversary, I've come to say that America's revolutionary heritage and America's revolutionary spirit, life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice for government of, by, and for the people is under siege, my friends. And if churches of conscience don't take the lead in their rescue and their revival, we can lose our democracy. I'm afraid we are in the process of losing our democracy. And he went on to say, in the early 1970s, Richard Nixon's Attorney General John Mitchell said, This country is about to go so far to the right that most people won't recognize it. John Mitchell said that 45 years ago. He said, a class war is being declared from the top down against the idea and ideal of equality. It's been driven ever since by a radical elite seeking to gain ascendancy over politics and to dismantle the political institutions, the legal and statutory canons, and the intellectual and cultural framework that check the excess of private power. Stay with me, because this is powerful. He said that class war was declared in the powerful polemic I read at the time, in the 70s, by the wealthy right-winger William Simon, who had been Nixon's Secretary of the Treasurer. In the book called Time for Truth, he declared that, quote, funds generated by business must rush by the multi-millions to conservative causes. It was a trumpet sounded for the financial and business elite to take back the power and privileges they had lost as a result of the Depression and the New Deal. Their long-range strategy, and this is all spelled out, was to cut workforces and wages, scour the globe in search of cheap labor, disregard the fact that working people would disproportionately feel the impact of rising prices and inflation, and trash the social contract and the safety net that was supposed to protect people from hardships beyond their control. Looking back, said Bill Moyers 15 years ago, it all seems so clear that we wonder how we could have ignored the warning signs at the time. What has been happening to working people, to the average of our population, is the direct consequence of corporate activism, intellectual propaganda, and the rise of a political religion of fundamentalism opposed to civil and human rights that threaten its paternalism. I know this is heavy stuff, but I think it's time for us to come to terms with what has just happened, what has just come to fruition. He said, we've witnessed the plunder of the public trust and the spread of corruption across America that has no equivalent except for the first Gilded Age. Back then, the privileged controlled politics and the purchase of votes, the corruption of election officials, the bribing of legislatures, the lobbying of special bills, and the flagrant disregard of the laws of the land. And they threatened the very foundation of democracy as it does now. When we consider all this, said Bill Moyers, we understand why Franklin Delano Roosevelt feared a government of money as much as he feared a government by the mob, because the two would be virtually indistinguishable. Okay. At that point in the address, Bill Moyers paused and said, okay, now that's the argument. Now here's the altar call. He said, you know, you can take the boy out of the Baptist, but you can't take the Baptist out of the boy. He said, one Sunday morning, I was early for church, and in the quiet of the sanctuary, I picked up a Bible, and I randomly opened to Matthew's gospel, and I started reading through. The story of Jesus of Nazareth unfolds chapter by chapter: the birth at Bethlehem, the baptism at the River Jordan, the temptation in the wilderness, the Sermon on the Mount, the healing of the sick and the hungry, the parables, the calling of the disciples, the healings and affirmation and full inclusion of women. Always embedded like pearls throughout the story are teachings of compassion and forgiveness and reconciliation. He said, in these pages, we're in the presence of one who clearly understands the power of love, the joy of mercy, and the healing of kindness. But then suddenly, he said, as I was reading, the story turns. And Jesus' demeanor changes. The tone and temper of the narrative shift. And the Prince of Peace suddenly becomes a disturber of the peace. As Jesus went into the temple, turned over the tables, scattered the money around, and bounced the money changers out of there. And he said, I closed my Bible, and it hit me. The Bible tells us that there is a time to throw the rascals out. I could go on, and there's a lot of more powerful stuff from his address. But he basically said, that is part of the vocation of followers of Jesus, of spirit-centered people who are trying to live life in alignment with the intentions of the divine. There's a time for direct action that's not necessarily nice, but that in no way violates love or violates anyone whom you are confronting. But when people of faith rise up and say, you know what, enough is enough. There's got to be some accountability, and we are going to challenge the actions that are being taken. So I need to end. I'll just say this. What happened a couple days ago is only the beginning. Only the beginning of things that may happen like it, but also only the beginning of a renewed response and awakening from those of us who will say, you know what, no, we are not going to accept the implications of what just happened as the law of the land. And if laws that make it legal for people of the same gender to be married, you can count on us being in the streets and in the halls of power, opposing that and standing in solidarity with people for whom that right has been repealed. And Bill Moyers said, it's always been Jesus' plan that the church would take over his way of being in the world. That we would be the ones who would challenge when challenge is needed. All right, it's been enough. I'm going to just end kind of abruptly, but the last thing I will say is whatever we do, we are those who will do it in love. So how to express anger, how to challenge injustice strongly, decisively, but lovingly. That's our challenge. All right. Amen.